have a dream, oh, I have a dream. Red, white, and blue, fly free, fly free. I believe, oh, I believe. Will you dream with me?
Good morning, everyone out there. Welcome to Changing Times. It is Wednesday, March the 15th. And this month is going by, and we are live at the Axe Media Group headquarters in Springfield, Missouri. And, you know, Don, I am the kind of acting weatherman for Axe Media Group. And so I just got to say very quickly, today and tomorrow, we got spring break going on in Southwest Missouri. And the students and the parents are going to have a great day today and tomorrow. It's going to be in the low 60s to mid 60s. But this weekend is going to be down to about 10 degrees at night. So we're going to go through a little cold spell, and I'm predicting that we're going to start into spring this next week. So that's my weather forecast, because that's a positive weather forecast. And so we're glad to do that. You know, we are talking about social issues. Don and I have been doing this for now 100. We have a cake. This is our 100th show, soon to be 2 years. We have a beautiful cake that Jody and Jaden made and are bought, and it's celebrating our 100th year. So we're going to have that and fruit and vegetables as soon as this show's over.
Hard to believe it's 100 episodes.
Oh, yeah. God's been good, and so been blessing us, and we got great guests like Larry Ballard today. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
We're glad to have you back. What's happening is Don and I have been talking about social issues, social causes with positive solutions at the end now for 100 shows. And today is no exception. This could be the most important show that we've ever done since we started. And the reason why I say that is because last week, and we're going to have Larry, you give a little summary, maybe a 4 or 5 minute summary of last week's show, because a lot of people could have missed this show last week. And you can go back on Axe Media Group's Facebook page, and you can see that show anytime. You can go back and see our very first show on human trafficking. So you can see any of our shows in the library at the Axe Media Group. So that's one thing on Facebook. Also live today on YouTube and Twitter, and that's a great thing. And then anytime else, if you want to go on LinkedIn, Daily Motion, and Rumble, you can see our show. And people, like I was telling Larry before the show started today, people go back, once they see our show, they'll go back and get interested and look and see what other shows. And so we always are having people going backwards and looking at shows. And so that's really kind of cool too, that we're not just doing a show for 1 week and then it kind of goes away. So I think that's really, really, really good. So I'm Lynn Morris.
And I'm Don Blackard.
You sure are. And I tell you what, she just barely got here today.
I know, yeah. I was cutting it close. The closest I've ever cut it was on show 100.
Yeah, I know. But you know what? I had faith that you'd be here.
Yep, and here I am.
Yeah, you're the star of the show. You're the star of the show. We got to have someone that's pretty that kind of balances out Larry and I.
Well, it's been a lot of fun.
So this really good. Hey, let's go ahead and get started. Larry, so you had a near-death experience.
Right.
And during that time, God spoke to you, and he's continued to speak to you. And that's why you wrote this first book, Liberty Crusade. Okay. And you have told me that God has given you messages to write 2 more books. So you're already working on your second book. And that happens sometimes, you know, when people have these near death experiences. God really could save your life like he did. You could have been dead. And you're alive, and now you're doing a purpose for God every day. And I think this is really good. So we talked last week about China. It's a superpower, but we also talked about China's not going to be a superpower. It's probably our number one enemy today in the United States. However, it's going to be a regional power at some point. And God's actually in control of everything that's going on. So just very quick summary of what we did last week, and then we're going to jump into, I think, even a more important topic today.
Okay. First of all, how did China rise? China rose because the global elite wanted it to rise. And all they had to do was buy a few politicians and see to it that China had access to the world's resources, that they had access to the money they needed to to build an industrial powerhouse country that they control trade. And when they got all of that, that converted into money, which allowed them to buy politicians, to buy media people, to buy all the power and influence they needed to control the world. Well, that's changing because we're entering into a new period. We're going to be talking today about the banking crisis that's coming. This one is going to be different than any we've had in the past. We had 1929, the Great Depression, that took America into a bankruptcy, that changed it from being a democracy, a republic, into being a democracy, a socialist communist order. We had the '08 collapse, which was catastrophic. But this is about the Great Reset. Carl Schwab's Great Reset that says, you will have nothing, but you will be happy. Well, the good news, folks, is that's his vision. God's got a different vision. And that's why China is going to fall, because the power that's been given to China to do those four things is being systematically taken away. They're their own worst enemy. We're in the book of Esther, and what they have done to control us is now going to be reversed upon them. So basically, what's going to happen to China that's going to turn them into a regional power? So right now, they've inflicted us with COVID, which has backfired on them. The world now sees them as a pariah. And it's also led to a situation where they've broken down the global supply chain and proven to be an unreliable source. People who bought cars, we talked about last week, waited a year because they couldn't get semiconductor chips. So with that having happened, the money is flowing out of China. People are no longer investing in China. Manufacturing is leaving at a rapid pace. That's 53% of their GDP. They also have a catastrophic problem with the real estate market, which is 33%. So as we summarize this, 86% of their entire GDP is at risk right now. And that's just the beginning of the problems that they have. They have control over a few natural resources, rare earth, but they import 75% of their oil. They're very vulnerable to shortages on resources. So they have to have their Belt and Road Initiative completed so they can get to oil in the Middle East and so they can get to the resources that are in Africa. That Belt and Road Initiative is failing because the money that they need to fund it is drying up. So what they dreamed about was getting all of those natural resources and controlling the world. That's not happening. They built mega cities that are now called ghost cities that have been setting, think of Detroit, folks. If you've seen any pictures of what Detroit looks like now after setting vacant for 20 or 30 or 40 years, that's what's happened to these ghost cities. They're falling apart. They're even coming in and demolishing them. Then they've got a catastrophic, insolvable problem with the demographics. Their one-child policy has caused a reversal where there were 1.4 billion people, the most people on the whole planet in China. It is estimated that by 2050, they will have been reduced to 650 million people. So even now, what's happening is they have the oldest population in the entire world. They don't have enough workers to keep the supply chain going. So they're having rolling blackouts because of labor shortages. They're having rolling blackouts because they have a catastrophic, I believe, God-ordained intervention occurring where they have massive floods in the south and droughts in the north. And there are pictures, if you want to go on the internet, of previously navigable rivers where they took barges up and down that have not one drop of water flowing in them. Now, what's the consequence of that? A large portion of their energy comes from hydroelectric. The water in many instances has dropped below the outlets for the hydroelectric dams. That's another reason they're having rolling blackouts. So one of the biggest examples I could give is of industry leaving China is the Foxconn facility, which is where Apple produces our phones. 100,000 people work at that single facility. Apple has decided that they're not a reliable source. They're outsourcing that to 5 different countries. That is happening all across China. So that is going to implode China. They've got a demographic crisis. They've got an ecological crisis. And even more so than the droughts and the floods, they have had reckless pollution. They have 26% of the little bit of usable water they have. The groundwater is contaminated to the point that it can't be used for human consumption. And if I remember the number, I think it's 46% of the groundwater is contaminated. So basically, China has just rolled on and on and on. and done things that were ultimately going to come back to destroy them. So China is on the brink of collapse. So if I go back to where we started, the control of the supply chain is systematically being taken away from them. Their access to natural resources being withdrawn from them. Their manufacturing is being taken from them, which means the money that allowed them to become the superpower is leaving. And so what is happening is, this is very important, folks, God's intervening to take us in a 180-degree different direction instead of going to globalization, whereby the global elite wanted to accomplish the following. They wanted to create a new type of economy, not a communist economy, not a democratic economy, but a super capitalist communist society, because they wanted the control of capitalism, but they wanted the free market system to build money. That system is going to fall and collapse, and the commerce is going to be redistributed. So we're going from globalization, which was the threat that we were facing, to deglobalization, which is going to take us, folks, to the good news. We're going to do a second show after this. Today's going to be a little scary. We're going to talk about the absolute collapse of the total monetary system. But the good news is God tells us that the kingdoms of man are going to fall. That means communism is going to fall. That means capitalism is going to fall. But then he assures us that there'll be a new system. The kingdom of God is going to fall upon the earth. We're going to have revival across the world, and there's a completely new economic system. And here's the good news. God's already shown it to us. We had a preview. For 34 years, right here in America, we had a system that equalized but elevated the condition of all mankind. And then an event occurred, and that system was wiped off the face of the earth. But it was the prototype that we saw that we can implement to implement God's kingdom on earth. So today we're going to talk about some scary, scary, scary stuff. But I want you to hang in here, because next week we're going to show you that what's going to come out of this, it is absolutely imperative that the global financial are utterly, completely, and absolutely collapsed, because we can't have them rearing their heads and coming back as they've done over and over and over again. So when we do this, when this collapses, we're going to have a completely new economic system. We're going to have peace and prosperity on this earth, the likes of which we have never had. And China will never again rise to be a world superpower to threaten us or the rest of the world, because the entire world views them as a pariah. So a couple of quick examples. The world believes that they released COVID. The world believes that they are threatening Taiwan. Why is that important? They're the number one manufacturer of semiconductor chips. No semiconductor chips, the entire technological platform of the world is destroyed. They're threatening that if they're pushed into a corner, nuclear war. The world cannot do business with a pariah nation that is willing to do those kind of things. And if you don't think I'm right, look at Hong Kong. Look at what they did with the forceful overtake of Hong Kong. The world has turned against China. End of statement.
Well, and I tell you what, Larry, so even though that is scary, some of the things that you said, it's extremely exciting for Christians to know that, yeah, we may go through some bad times, but God's going to be with us, and he's got a plan. And as long as we know that God's got a plan, then we're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's extremely exciting. So let's just go ahead and get into this banking situation. You know, this has all changed in the last 7 days. Yes. And so you got Silicon Valley Bank. And so I think it was the 7th largest bank.
16th.
16th, okay. And extremely large bank, and it's gone under. And then you have a bank in Signature Bank, I believe, in New York that went under. And then there's actually another bank that the United States not really talking about too much, but there's third. And then I heard today on a talk show that on the way here that Moody has down-rated all banks in the United States. They've rated all banks down, not leaving any up, but rating them all down. And then yesterday on a talk show, you know, I were talking last night that one of the talk shows, a good friend of mine, Elijah Harr, former Speaker of the House, he's got a great show in the afternoon, every afternoon at 4 o'clock. and he was talking about 6 large banks in this country. One of those banks, and I'm not going to mention the name. I've thought about this and prayed about this. There is a bank has large banks in Springfield, Missouri, and they're one of those 6 that are mentioned. I don't want to create a panic yet, but there will be a panic at some point. And just to know that they've been downgraded and they're in trouble. They're watching them every day. They're watching those 6 or 7 banks every day to try to make sure that they don't go under. You and I know, and Don knows that they're going to go under. They're all going to go under. And then, like you said, we're gonna have a renaissance, a new government, and then God's going to be in control of that government. And one of the things I think that is important for people to know is right now, whether you're a Republican or Democrat or independent, it doesn't really make any difference to me. What makes a difference to me, and I think a lot of Americans in this country would love to have Republicans and Democrats, whoever's in control, work together. Now, we're never going to agree on everything, but we could agree on a lot of stuff that would actually help our country and help our people. And right now, we're just so divided that it's so hard to get anything accomplished. But during this new era that God's going to create and help usher us into this, I believe that the parties will be working together. There'll be more unity, right? And that's God's plan, unity to do the right thing for the people in this country. I think that's going to be a real exciting blessing that's going to happen. So what do you think? I think that I know this, but I want the people to hear this. This is not an isolated event, is it? This is not just something that happened with 2 or 3 banks and it's going to get better. It's not going to do that, is it?
I spent the last 3 days because I think when you go on a program like this, I have my opinions based on my research, but I need to know what everyone else is saying. And there's a variety of people out there. There's some people saying it is a one-off. But then what you said a minute ago says, all right, already it's dripping out, and we see it's not a one-off. It's not just Silicon Valley Bank. It's the entire banking institution. Then I hear to the other talking heads that are probably bought and paid for, and they're saying, folks, this isn't the Fed's fault. This is just something that's happening, and it wasn't planned. Well, what I'd like to do is I'm going to approach this in a completely different way from anybody you've seen in the last 10 days, anybody you're going to see in the next month, because God gave me this assignment for this time 50 years ago when I was 20 years old. I have a database of information, of research that goes back to the very founding of this nation. So as we start to build, is this a one-off or is this something that's been planned that is going to have a long-term ripple effect? I want to go through history, and I want to take you through what I call tipping points, which are all discussed in this book along with many others. And I'm going to show you that within the world, the Federal Reserve is probably the most evil organization that we can think of. And right behind it is the UN, and behind that is the Vatican, and behind that is every bought and paid for government in the world. I did another show a few weeks ago called The Uniparty that speaks to what you're talking about. It is the fact that we don't have anything except theater going on in Washington right now, because you've got a few conservatives who are in there for the right reasons, trying to save the nation. But most of the big movers and shakers in Washington have been bought and paid for. They were put into office. They were selected, groomed, financed, and placed into office in order to forward the agenda of the global elite. That's all going to change. When this banking system comes down, we're going to see entire nations, one after another, after another, after another, collapse. So this is going to go beyond the banking system to the political system, beyond the political system, the corporate arena. And when we're done, it's going to be like an atomic bomb has gone off. Everything is going to be leveled, and that's going to scare people. So before I get into the history that's going to scare you, I want to reassure you, at the end of this short period of time is going to be a period that you cannot even imagine of peace and prosperity on this earth. So let's get into the history. So we start with Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin says, the reason we fought the Revolutionary War was because King George III had placed us under his central bank, which meant immediately we were in debt because every dollar that was printed at interest. So then we had the Revolutionary War. We ostensibly won. But before Washington was out of office, that war had led us into bankruptcy, and bang, we're under the central bank, the first central bank of America. 20 years later, their charter expires. And Madison says, I'm not going to renew it. And Washington and England says, oh, but you will. And there was an article in the Times in England, and it said, to you pompous United States of America, either you will sign our charter or we will reduce you to colonial status. So what was that? The War of 1812, the Second Revolutionary War. The point I'm making is he who controls money controls the world. Rothschild, who's the head of the global financial system, basically also said, I care not. This is a time when we were talking about the aristocracies, when England was the ruling power of the world. I care not what puppet sits upon the throne of England. He who controls the money controls the monarchy. So it's about money. And what is the Fed about? About controlling money. Hitler said, Stalin said that implementation of a central bank is 90% of establishing communism. And so right now, all but 3 nations in the world have a central bank, which means they've been filtrated by communism, which means that their governments have been bought and paid for. So we going back to the presidents and back to our history story, we had the War of 1812, the Second Revolutionary War. Then comes along a fighter, Andrew Jackson. And he says at the end of his presidency, the biggest accomplishment I've made in my entire life was to get rid of the Second Federal Reserve. Then comes along the traitor Wilson. And he is put into office by money that was given to him by J.P. Morgan. And he promised the American people, coming off the heels of the removal of the second bank, there will never, I swear, never be another central bank. Within a year, they passed the Federal Reserve Act, and we were back under that slavery system again. So that traitor, bought and paid for, inflicted us with chains of bondage from the monetary system of the global elite. And then let's fast forward to Kennedy. And just like Andrew Jackson, he attempted to get rid of the Fed. He issued silver certificates so that the currency was not going to be fiat anymore, but backed by something tangible. And he was going to get rid of the Federal Reserve. For that, he had to die. So I can do a whole story on why they killed Kennedy, but that's the central issue. Anybody who tries to get rid of the Fed is either assassinated or they make an attempt on his life. And Andrew Jackson had, I believe, 2 separate assassination attempts and survived both of them. So what we see is a ruthless system that is willing to kill as many people as they need to kill to accomplish their global control. So let's take World War I. That is the most significant war in the history of America. And I'd like it sometime to do an entire show on just that one war. That war changed the balance of power in the world in some very significant ways. And so basically, that war was because they were at one of those tipping points where they thought they were going to lose control of the global supply chain. And so they inflicted us with a war that killed 15 million people just so they could keep control. Now let's fast forward to 2019. And what do we see? We see something that I dub the plandemic. That virus, COVID-19, that was released upon us, that nobody believed what I'm about to say. It was just something that got out of a lab. It was from a bat. It wasn't planned. Well, FDR said, in politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happened, you can bet it was planned that way. And then what has unraveled since then? We find out that that virus, COVID, was engineered in a lab, and that lab was in Wuhan, and Fauci used money from the American government to fund that research that created that virus, that released it upon us. It was an act of war. So, folks, what I want to tell you is we've just gone through the control of the United States of America and ostensibly the world, because we're the leaders of the world, through war, through carnage, through killing people. The greatest mass genesis in the history of the world has been inflicted upon us with COVID. And they are now trying to take us into World War III. So when we finish this series, I hope to do another series that's going to be on war. And the message that I hope to give to people is that every one of the wars that I've been talking about were the result of false flag events, and they took us into war to further their agenda of eventually controlling us, collapsing us, and committing global genocide, reducing the world's population down to what they consider sustainable levels of about 1 billion people. Because the message that I want to give you is no matter what false flag you see, as soon as they finish these banks, they're going to go to the next level in their effort to collapse us. And that's going to be some kind of a false flag event to try to take us into war. And the message that I want to deliver is say no. We're not going to go. We understand what you've done to us, and we're not going to play that game. We're not going to send our sons and daughters off to die for the global elite so they can continue to enslave us. So when the second series occurs next week, we're going to get into the positives of what we do, how we reclaim our nation, how we turn this into the book of Esther, where there's a 180-degree reversal. Everything that the enemy intends to inflict upon us for harm is turned into good. So basically that takes us up to the present point. So let me stop and see if you have any other questions.
Well, so I want the audience to know that what I'm hearing you say is that's not just your ideas. That's not your own personal thoughts. Through God speaking to you over and over and over again over your lifetime, starting when you had that near-death experience, He has given you the ability to learn and study and research. It takes a lot of effort to know what you know, and then He's got this message that He's telling you that you're telling the people that we're going to have a great reset. Mm-hmm. But it's not going to be like, I looked at Glenn Beck's book, The Great Reset. I like Glenn Beck. A lot of people like Glenn Beck. But when I read his book, it doesn't really have a lot of stuff about Christianity. It doesn't really have anything about God doing what you're talking about. Same way with the gentleman that you were talking about, The Great Reset. There's books out there. There is going to be a great reset, but not like some of these people, because they're not strong Christians and they don't understand what really is going to happen. See, so I think that that's what I want the public to know. You're not just making this up. You're not one person that's just reading some research and coming up with facts. You're actually basing this on what God has spoken to you. And just very quickly, we just spent a minute or two. So I just want to make sure that people know this is not the same thing as 2008 when we had a really bad recession and we had banks failing and we had real estate issues and we had all these things going on. It's not even like the other things prior to that. It's different, right? Because there is a purpose and a reason for this great reset, because God has created this great reset. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me give you an example of how much worse this is going to be, or put another way, how it is going to clear the slate so that we can have the government of the world that God wants us to have. So every financial collapse is planned in advance, just like this one. So this one is no different than 29, no different than 08. So let me walk you through how they create the kind of situation that we're in right now. There's a formula. What God gave me after I had my near-death experience, He said, everything you do has to be based on two things, the Bible and history. So what did we just go through? We went through a long lineage of history. We've interjected it with comments from the Bible. What God said I will do for you is something that you will not see in the normal mainstream, because I have given you instructions to study U.S. history, global history, economics, politics, geology, sociology, anthropology, climatology, on and on. And I've given you an unusual memory so you can remember those things and hold them in suspension and do what? Connect the dots, put the puzzle pieces together. And in so doing, He said to me, I will give you the ability to take the complex that is seemingly ununderstandable and put it in simple terms so that I will use you to open the eyes of the people so that we can set the captives free. So that's what this is about. The message that I have is very different than the talking heads. God is not going to use me if I'm going to have a muzzle on me. I have to be free to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And if I don't, God will be done with me that fast. It's that simple. So this is going to be like nothing you've ever seen. It's not a half truth and a truth mingled with a lie. It is the truth, period. And it's based upon history. And every chapter in this book originated because God would wake me up in the morning and tell me, this is something you need to know. Go out and study it, research it, become an expert on it. Where necessary, he had me work in the field to get personal hands-on experience. He had me be in nations so that I could experience things as they were happening. So that's all firsthand. So now, where do we go from here? Redirect me, because I think I got off track.
Well, I just want the audience to know we've got all these events that have happened in the past, and we need to learn from history. But this new event that's just now starting to happen with these few banks going to spread kind of like measles around the world, because it's not just about the United States. This is about the world's failure of banks. I noticed the other day, England has bailed out one of their big banks. Mm-hmm. You're not hearing a lot about it, but if you read and study, England has done the same thing. So they've got it. And there's other world banks around different countries. All those banks are beginning to fail. And so it's not like just one country is going to fail. We got to have what I call the Great Reset, that God's going to reset this world. And the United States is going to be the top country again someday with this reset, right?
Someday soon. You just reset my brain. I just remembered where I was going. So basically what we wanted to do was talk about how do they orchestrate these collapse. It's very simple, folks. 4 simple steps. Don't let them make you believe it's too complicated for you to understand. In 1929, in 08, and now, they did one thing. They drastically increased the money supply. So let's go back. In 29, it was 62%. In 08, I don't know how much it was, but it was substantially larger than in 29. And then this event that we see now, 08, was triggered by the 9/11 event. And it took all the way till 08 to collapse the economy. The start of this bank failure started the day they released COVID. Why? Because it gave them an excuse to print more money than had ever been printed in the entire last 200 years. They drove the nations of the world into so much debt that they couldn't consume any more. So the only way they could service that debt in order to keep the nations from falling was at 0% interest. So the second step is increase the money supply, lower the interest rate, get people to borrow lots of money, and take them into so much debt that they can't handle any more at all. Then what do? Then they pop the trigger. They set the trap and they catch you. So now what has the Fed done? The Fed is here to fix the problem that they created. But they're trying to tell us, it wasn't us, we didn't do it. But they did do it, folks. They knew what they were doing. They increased the money supply, they lowered the interest rate, and they brought everybody into debt. And then right on cue, they raised the interest rate over and over and over and over and over.
It's not done yet.
No.
They're still going to raise it.
Now, the U.S. is in a unique position right now, but it's not going to stay this way. We can absorb those debts, those increases in interest rates, because we're the world's reserve currency, which means ostensibly we can print lots and lots and lots of money and have a very minimal effect on inflation. But the other nations, you mentioned England, it was more than just one bank in England. Basically, the entire English government was on the brink of collapse. Almost the entire parliament was turned over. And what they had to do was sell massive amounts of bonds in order to float the country. The same thing happened to Japan. It's going to happen to nation after nation after nation, including China. and including the United States. So now we're to the point where they've raised the interest rates. And that was, oh, we had to do it because inflation. Well, why did the inflation occur? Because they printed so much money. So then what's the last step in the process? It's every one of these collapses follows the same formula. Then they tighten the money. So now you've got interest rates that you can't pay and you can't borrow any money. And so you're trapped. You're like, your back is against the wall. It's that simple, folks. Increase the money supply, low interest rates, bump the interest rates up, freeze the money, collapse the economy. And this time it is going to be at a magnitude that we've never seen before because the entire world is up to here in debt. There's no more wiggle room. It's not just some kind of a financial collapse. It's not a depression. It is a global reset. But the good news is it's going to bring back God's kingdom. Let me stop there and see what else you'd like to talk about.
Well, I tell you what, I think, Larry, so much. We could talk hours on this, and we only have 45 minutes, and we're going to run out of time. But I want to talk about our sponsors. Our show wouldn't be what it is today without our three sponsors, right?
Yeah,
Don?
that's right.
And so our very first sponsor, Brad Pistow, just a tremendous man, a man of God. He used to actually be a youth pastor before he became a financial advisor. His dad was in stocks and securities and things like that. He's actually located in Ozark, Missouri, Trinity Insurance and Financial Services. I use him. Don family uses him for retirement planning. Just one of the smartest men in the country. And his phone number is 417-581-9222, 417-581-9222. And they'll send you a book. He's got two books that are best-selling books on Amazon on retirement planning. It's the first one, Safe Money Matters, and the second one is Bulletproof. Tremendous books. And it's just never too, because of all the things going on right now in this world, it's never too early to think about retirement and how you can try to have some kind of nest egg that you're going to be able to live on. So we're going to be through some dangerous times before we get to some good times. But Brad Pistow is a tremendous guy, and he's located right in Ozark, Missouri. Our second sponsor, Youngblood Motor Group, that's John Youngblood and John Whittaker. My last two cars, my Grand Cherokees, have come from them. And honestly, they sell Nissans and Kias now, and they have a tremendous new car selection on one side, and then they have on the other side of South Campbell in Springfield, Missouri, they have used cars, and most of those cars are certified cars. So when you drive them down the road, they're not going to have something go wrong with it. They're going to last you lots of miles before you ever have to have anything done, which is a great thing. Cars are so expensive today, whether it's new or used. And then they've been in business over 43 years. One of the longest, oldest family-owned car dealerships in Southwest Missouri. They're just great people. Not only did they sell you a great car, they actually give you great service. I was just in there getting service, and they didn't charge me for anything that they were doing. They just was looking at some stuff, helping me with some stuff, and they're just great people. So that's our second sponsor. And then our third sponsor is one of our own. He's a co-host with us, subs when Don and I aren't here. And then he's also CEO of his own nonprofit, Choosing to Live. He wants people to choose life over death or suicide, and he's on, and he's an Elvis impersonator. He's a really tremendous realtor down in Ozark, Missouri, called The Firm, FIRM, and he sells all kinds of real estates. And if you buy a house, I would recommend to buy a house from him, and then he's going to do an Elvis concert in your backyard. And all you got to do is have some refreshments. Everybody bring their lawn chairs, and all of a sudden you're going to know all the neighbors up and down your street. You're going to be the most popular person on the street because of Louis Michael singing Elvis songs, because he can sing all kinds of songs, but he's just a tremendous singer. And so his phone number is 417-988. Well, I don't even know what the last three numbers is on that. Let me see here. I do know. I'm going to get this
1086.
right. 1086. Okay. 1086. Thanks, Jody, for bailing me out there.
And I think it's important to say, Lynn, that choosing to live, when people have financial crisis or uncertainty or anything like that, it's never okay to take your life. And
No.
I love that Louis Michael has dedicated his life to getting that message across, because, you know, life is a wild ride and you just have to stay on the ride. And talking about, you know, depressing stuff or serious stuff can be pretty heavy on people because people are already going through financial struggles. And, you know, we just have to trust as Christians that we know the end and we trust in the Lord.
Sure, sure. And I tell you what, Louis has done a lot of good around the area, and he will continue to do that. You know, he almost took his own life, and God spoke to him just before that trigger was pulled. It was already on his facing his temple there, and touching his temple, and so he's like you, Larry. He's had messages from God. God has spoken to him, and his job is to go out and try to save lives, and that's good.
Yeah. And then, Lynn, to circle back, you know, the song that we've had for the past 100 episodes,
Yeah.
you know, when God told me inspired me to write this song, you know, the line in there, do you dream this land stays free under God and not tyranny? You know,
Yeah.
we have this illusion that sometimes tyranny is okay because they build the trap, you know, but we know that we need to go back to God
Yeah.
as a nation and a world.
Well, and that, so, you know, what you did, God created the idea and you came up with the words through God. And again, that's just how God works. And I'm so grateful because we use that song to start the show. We use this show the song to end the show. And John Miner, good friend of yours in Nixon, Missouri, sung that song, and then he died shortly after that, unfortunately. And then our friends, Faith Zimmer and Adam, helped kind of create the musical background.
They kind of
on
help
that.
produce it.
Yeah, produce it and stuff like that. And so just an awesome video, and so I hope people appreciate that. Well, how much time left do we have, Jody?
And I want to say, you know, a big thank you to our producers, because everybody is a volunteer.
Yeah.
And even though we've been here 100
minutes?
episodes, Lynn, there have been 100 producers, and it's only been 2 producers.
Yeah. Well, actually 3, because we had Mark.
Yes.
Matt,
Yeah.
we had Mac, and then we
I
had,
consider them a team. So
yeah, Mark and Jody are husband and wife, and we got Jaden over there watching, and she's going to help with refreshments after a while. We got cake, we got vegetables, we got fruit. And
yep.
stuff
And then
like
a big,
that.
you know, shout out to just Axe Media Group for
yeah.
everything that they do.
Yeah.
And if you're not watching the other shows, you should check them out. And we're still looking for another sponsor.
Yeah. I think we about got it, but I just keep saying that, but God will make that happen too. I absolutely know that's going to happen. And so we've got about 5 minutes left. So how are we going to summarize this where people know that things are going to happen? All of them are not going to be so good, but we're going to live through it. And then there's better times ahead with God actually controlling our lives and our government.
I'm going to go through the speed story of how they're collapsing this. You need to understand what the fractional reserve banking system is. What it says is that, banks, you can loan 90% of every dollar that we put into your bank, you can loan it out. You only got to keep 10% in-house to cover emergencies. Well, guess what? When COVID came along, they suspended that requirement. So there are banks out there that have no requirements on them at all for how much money they keep in reserves. If that isn't a trap, I don't know what is. So basically, they're setting this thing up in order to collapse us. So the banks are intentionally being collapsed. So I want you to walk through. The Fed is saying, oh, 08, we didn't know. It came down overnight and we didn't know. But folks, remember, they had a 2,000-page stimulus bill written that they forced through Congress within a matter of days. They know what's coming. So let's walk through what they tell us versus what's truth. And you'll see that this is being inflicted upon us. So we've got a fractional reserve system that only requires 10%. And now we have no requirement for how much is put in. We drove the amount of debt up to the ceiling where nobody could support it. And then we had low interest rates. So because now we could handle that debt at 0 interest rate, but then the Fed increased the interest rates, and they knew what that would do. They knew that other nations were not going to be able to correspondingly raise their interest rates. They knew that that would cause whole governments to collapse, but they knew something else. Let's just take an example. You've got a bank account and you're an individual and you've got $50,000 in it. You're a corporation and you've got $500,000 in the bank. and now they're raising the interest rates. Well, those banks were told by the Fed, we have no intention of raising interest rates. A lie. Then they raised the interest rates. Well, being told that they weren't going to raise the interest rates, they put their money in long-term, low-interest, safe investments like T-bills and mortgages. So they're out there unable to pay the people who have their money in their banks high interest rates. So the people are facing a situation where every day that $10,000 they have, that $500,000 they have, because of inflation and because of low interest rates, is actually becoming worth less and less and less. So they knew when they raised the interest rates, it was going to cause people to withdraw money. And when they didn't have the reserves, they knew that that was going to take people, the banks, into a situation of liquidity. And they knew that was going to create a crisis. And they knew that was going to cascade bank after bank after bank. And they knew that was going to cascade governments. So let's go back to Central Valley Bank. That was the catalyst for this. Remember, nothing happens by accident. That bank was chosen for a very specific reason. That bank was awarded by Forbes the distinction of being one of the best 20 banks in the nation for 5 years running. And now they're telling us it was mismanaged. No, it wasn't mismanaged. It was a unique bank that had a lot of venture capital people in it who have a unique situation. So they had not 100,000, not 500,000, but their biggest depositor had $3.2 billion. Those people were forced into a situation where they had to withdraw money. That meant that the bank was set up to fall by the very things that I just outlined. It was done by the Federal Reserve on cue, on plan. And it was like the Titanic. The Titanic was sunk in World War I because they wanted an event to get us into the war. Well, right now they want to take us off the fiat currency, the paper system.
Larry, we're going to run out of time.
Okay.
But let me tell you this. God didn't tell me this, but I do believe that the federal government is trying to bail out these two banks and going to try to pay back everybody's money where nobody loses
They've already
money.
done it.
But guess what? They're not going to do it on all the banks as they fail in this country. They don't have the money to do that. And so we're going to continue this crisis until we see the end of it.
Let me wrap it up for you real quick.
We've got 15 seconds.
All right. What they're going to do is bail ins, not bail outs. And that is going to be catastrophic to the middle class of America. They are going to do with this what they did with COVID, is an attack on the middle class of America. Intermediate-sized corporations are going to be crushed by what they're doing.
Miss the values, the old-time family. They dream this land stays free under God, not tyranny. That's what it means to really dream. 1, 2, 3. Can I get a hoorah from a patriot like me? Can I get an amen? Do I hear a hallelujah? Can I get a hoorah from a patriot?